Shadism, colorism, pigmentocracy. These are some of the terms used to describe a form of prejudice. And though it may not be as recognized as some other forms of prejudice, it is indeed just as real.
Shadism would be a set of institutional and social preferences to people of lighter skin complexion in the African diaspora world.
The construction of a value system that is rooted in how close we approach the white ideal of beauty.
Within the Caribbean society and slavery, there was a particular, I almost call it a mantra, but it was a system by which you identified particular groups, and it was according to color or skin pigmentation.
You ever stop to study how many shades Barbadians got? Ranging from black to bakra, starting with black as a pot. Is enough shades for truth. Must see whole 15 in all. Take it from me, I count them, so I know this thing tall.
Jeanette Lane Clark wrote that, I believe, in the 1970s. Interestingly, Jeanette herself grew up in a place called Belleville, so she was one of the few black families living in Belleville at the time. This is a performance poem called Shades of Spades. And what Jeanette is trying to tell you is not just the history of how what you would call shadism works, but she's also giving you meanings to it. So in her poem, she ensures that the hair color goes with the skin color. So you might be light skin and frizzy hair, or light skin and smooth hair. So you're calling all these constructs that keep coming back over time. And this question of privilege through skin tone, privilege through texture of hair, that's the recurring decimal that we have to keep working on. Why is it coming back? Where are new meanings being given? And your question earlier of, do we think that privilege, this act of discrimination, affects societies? Yes, it does. That's why she ends her poem saying, we're not subject to, we're not prejudiced, we only discriminate.
It is no secret that certain prejudice ideologies can be traced to the days of colonialism, and the ideologies that reinforce the practice of shadism are no different.
There's been documentation over the generations to show that the lighter skinned individual may be placed in a position where they're not, for example, working in the field or in a special position in the field, so they're not doing what is hard labor. That was a perception. And indeed, when you look at the records, you can see that practice. Sometimes the lighter skinned individual was elevated to the house. I am not saying that the house is not hard work. I am not saying that being an enslaved domestic itself did not have the insults and the obscenity and the tensions and the lived experience that none of us would want. But there was a practice within the time of plantation where that lighter skin perhaps got you further. Indeed, we have a construct called free-colored, because individuals at various points in time did gain their freedom through being the sons or daughters of individuals who were of mixed race or through their skin color. Coming out of enslavement, nothing is steady. But what we can see over time again is this continued practice of perhaps privilege because of the color of the skin.
You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic. or the basement. But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes, they ate the worst food, and they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. This was the difference between the two.
Colorism, Shadism has always been part and parcel of colonialism. And the point about it is really Caucasian types, English, French, German, Teutonic, Norwegian, Belgian, etc., interacted with other groups, with Amerindians, or indigenous people of the Americas, with the Indians, with Africans. They emphasize colorism in order to distinguish.
Well, a number of the things that we attribute to colorism can be certainly found throughout both the Old World and the New World. So they're prevalent in Africa, they're prevalent in Latin America, they're prevalent in North America, they're prevalent in the Caribbean. So certainly the colonial plantation complex is very important for understanding colorism, but it's not just located within the Caribbean or the Americas.
The effect of prejudice manifests itself in many ways. Sometimes it's blatant. Other times it is so subtle it can go seemingly unnoticed.
If we continue to have Jesus Christ represented as a white man, if we continue to have gods of that you present and angels that you present to a predominantly black community as white, if the church itself, Christianity, does not directly confront the issue, if you prefer to continue to give preference to an interpretation of spirituality and religion that is decidedly European, I don't think that we can separate Africa, blackness, and Shadism.
The blue box skirt ban this is a case of apartheid. And I can tell the blue box skirt ban was established in 1982 as a group of old drunken white men. And they did not allow black people in the band. By the year 2000, they were trying to integrate, to get in a few. Now it has a few pockets of black people in the blue box skirt band. But to all intents and purposes, it is still a white segregated band. And it leads our parade on Kadooment Day by people agreeing to let it go first.
The media has the power to both educate and entertain. It has the ability to subliminally and directly influence our opinions and the way we look at the world. So does the media play a part in the perpetuation of Shadism?
Obviously, the mass media has a part to play in the perpetuation of colorism. The media is just a microcosm of society.
So if you take a look at the Lime ad, for example, which seeks to be hip and trendy and so on, you will notice that very often the images and the shades don't necessarily represent the proportion in a place like Barbados. Now that may be by accident, but if it is by accident, it is highly unusual that we have so many accidents across so many companies and at such a disproportionate rate.
There's an ideal image that's used for advertisements now, and the image doesn't necessarily have natural hair. The image doesn't have tends to have a lighter skin than a darker skin. Because there was always an argument, for example, that only lighter skinned persons show up on the camera. That's why advertisements had to have lighter skinned persons. That the population didn't want to see anyone with natural hair, and that's why we had to have straightened hair person. There were all kinds of arguments within the space of advertising.
Black like a tar. Black, I'm proud you have to know who you are. Black like a tar. Africa is the motherland, big up every black superstar.
Prejudice is destructive. It can warp our perception of others and ourselves. It can make us question our own self-worth. And once the seeds of doubt take root, they are difficult to shake loose.
The reason why the issue of beauty is not a trivial one is because beauty is tightly tied to self-esteem and confidence. So we are told as Black people from birth that we are less beautiful than other people if we remain in our natural skin. In other words, unless you bleach your skin, unless you straighten your hair, unless you do things to approach the white ideal, you are less beautiful. Hence the phenomenon of disproportionate use of weave by Black women and the increasing use of bleaching to approximate that white ideal.
It's certainly based on people's understandings that anti-Black prejudice and certain lighter skin complexions are the ways to gain certain social ascendancy within countries. And that's one of the reasons why people actually do it.
These cultural practices, they go and come, they go and come. It's back. All of us know the famous dancehall artist who, if he took off his shirt, then the tones of skin color are different. And I did see a play in Jamaica, which was amazing. The character was called Bleachy. The character was completely covered in cream. We never saw the character's face. We never saw the character. But the character was bleachy for an hour and a half. He was bleachy. Don't know what he looks like. And I thought that was wonderful because, in a sense, the playwright captured the cultural practice within the play.
So the question remains, how do we overcome shadism?
In the 1960s and 70s, at the time of the Black Power movement, with the idea that Black was beautiful, you certainly had a transvaluation of ideas of Blackness at that time.
I want to talk to Black people across this country. There are 4 things we have to do. Number 1, we have to stop being ashamed of being Black. We've got to stop being ashamed of being Black.
However, I find that in a time in which you don't have major social movements, what you see is this kind of imperial debris, this kind of legacy of colonialism actually takes over again, simply because it's never really truly gone. So I think that without concerted social action, without social movements that are pressing against these things, you will not see a diminution of them because they're being reproduced over and over again.
We need to root out from our society and from our schools the practice of giving favoritism and privilege to people of lighter skin. And yes, we have to do that. There is no other way of eradicating or even mitigating it unless we get into the conversation and we take action against it wherever it rears its head.
Well, the first step is to understand the fundamental nature of it, that it is not trivial, that it is not past, that we have not confronted it, to recognize that there is a problem.
We can no longer remain indifferent to shadism, no longer turn a blind eye and hope it disappears. For if we don't have unity within one race, how can we hope to have unity among all humankind?
Different fever na him day. Malaria fever anko, jaundice fever anko, hay